CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Several steps are to be taken. First will be the declaration of a state of emergency for 3 months. This will be done in a constitutional manner. We are announcing this only to protect and secure Egypt and to prevent any further interference.
Egypt is under a 3-month state of emergency after attacks on 2 Coptic churches that left at least 45 people dead. And this, along with the increased presence of Al-Shabaab in Somalia, the insurgency of Boko Haram in Nigeria, and the emergence of Al-Qaeda-linked terror groups in North Africa, have brought terrorism on the African continent firmly back into focus. Now, over the past decade, terror activities have grown exponentially on the continent, both in the number of attacks but also the number of terrorist groups. But these often get little notice in international media when compared to terrorist activities in Europe and the West. So with this in mind, what is the current status of Africa's anti-terrorism efforts? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, Egyptians are still reeling after the twin terror attacks on Coptic churches during Palm Sunday prayers. One of the blasts took place in Tanta, about 250 kilometers north of Cairo. Yasser Hakim has visited the city, and as he found out, many residents are coming to terms with the tragedy, but are adamant they'll continue to fight against terrorism.
The city of Tanta is a vibrant place with a population of nearly 5 million people. It's known to be the hub of agriculture, trade and textile industry in Egypt, as well as for its energetic and welcoming people. But the mood now has been far from vibrant. The feeling of sadness filling the air, and everyone is talking about one thing: last week's suicide attack.
The day of the church bomb here, I was 15 minutes late. Only 15 minutes. If the bomber was a bit late, I would have been died with them too. It's very sad. The scene here was horrific.
Egyptian Muslims and Christians have been arriving from far off to offer their respects. It's been more than a week, yet the families and friends of the victims still come to lay a wreath for their loved ones, where the ashes and remains of the victims have been buried. Meanwhile, the security situation has been upgraded around town.
There's been an overhaul in our security plans. From now on, everyone, no matter how important they are, will be fully checked and have to go through the X-ray. I myself have been thoroughly searched as I was entering the gate to be a role model for others. Everyone must abide by the current security measures.
Businesses haven't stopped. Terrorism is not new in Egypt, but as harsh as it is, Egyptians have learned to cope with it and continue with their daily lives.
The sales dropped for a while after the incident but started to pick up again. It's unfortunate. Why should this happen here, either to Muslims or Christians? We've always been away from these issues.
These are sad times here in Egypt, but the message I received from nearly everyone here is that they will stay united until they overcome this ordeal and terrorism is eradicated from the country. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Tanta.
And now to offer further analysis and insights into Africa's anti-terrorism efforts, I have expert guests standing by. In Cairo, Dr. Ziad Akul, he's a senior researcher at the Al-Ahram Center for Political Strategic Studies. In Lagos, Adeyemi Sonaike, the former assistant director of Nigeria's secret police. And in Mogadishu, resident and youth activist Mohammed Dirie Ibrahim. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining in the conversation. I'm going to start off with a few statistics here, because between 2011 and 2016, Nigeria's Boko Haram was tied to the killing of nearly 11,885 people in 814 attacks. Al-Shabaab has carried out 360 attacks in the last 10 years. Now, Ziad Akul, let's start off with you here, because Africa's terrorism situation seems grim, but doesn't seem to be getting that much global focus. Is the global fight against terrorism giving Africa minimal attention, though?
Well, I think that a lot of African countries right now are undergoing several measures to counter-terrorism. I think that due to a lot of domestic disturbances within African states in the past few years, terrorism has been able to flourish and find some hubs within the African continent. But at the same time, there are serious regional efforts led by mainly Egypt, and at the same time, a lot of international powers like the US and the EU to basically try and counter terrorism from its origins in Africa, whether this is through revising religious discourse, whether it's through revising some legislations, whether it's through sometimes international intervention within some of the terrorist hubs like Sinai or what's going on in Libya. But in general, there is a trend worldwide to actually pay more attention to the phenomena of terrorism in Africa, because apparently it has been undermined as, such as other issues in Africa are pretty much undermined all the time.
Adeyemi Sonaike, is that your perception as well, that perhaps there is minimal efforts to combat terrorism on the African continent, or there is little attention to the phenomenon of terrorism on the continent?
International community, international community are paying lip service to stop internal terrorism in Africa, because today America will say they will come to our aid, tomorrow we will not see them. So the same thing with other big powers, maybe because they are the ones selling arms and ammunition to all these terrorism countries. So if they can follow their words, their promise, I think it's a thing that will become things of the past.
Mohammed Dirie in Somalia, because you're grappling with Al-Shabaab and you have been grappling with Al-Shabaab for the last 10 years, though, looking at the specifics, what kind of attention is Al-Shabaab receiving? How many terrorist attacks, though, occur, for instance, coming out of Al-Shabaab in Somalia per day, per month?
To start with, the anti-terrorism effects and the efforts have been at juncture where, with the dynamic evolving activities of terror groups, Al-Shabaab linked to Al-Qaeda have been carrying bloody attacks, assassinations in many parts of the country for so long. But combined efforts of Somali National Army, AMISOM, and US forces missions have managed to reduce the muscles of efforts, the muscles of Al-Shabaab, in that by targeting and killing their leaders like Ahmed Godane and senior intelligence figures. In that effort, that has managed Al-Shabaab to lose many grounds and the areas they have been controlling, but they managed to carry out bloody attacks and assassinations in the country. With that in context, Al-Shabaab, most of the time, they carry the bloody attacks at the populated areas like the cities, also in government structures, government buildings, and other areas that might be that meets a lot of population, where a lot of population meet.
Right. We'll come back to this discussion in just a moment. But in Somalia, President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo has appealed to Al-Shabaab militants to lay down their weapons and help rebuild the country. He was speaking during celebrations to mark 57 years of Somalia's armed forces last week. Here's Susan Mungeli.
Somali soldiers are celebrating National Armed Forces Day. Founded in 1960, it's the Army's 57th anniversary. There are 40,000 troops in Mogadishu and the surrounding regions. But despite this, the Army has struggled to secure the country. Al-Shabaab remains the biggest challenge. The new government under President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo has vowed to prioritize security.
We have to implement changes to secure Mogadishu, where more than 3 million people live, as well as the rest of the country, which is under threat. We have to reclaim Al-Shabaab territory. That's what the Somali people expect us to do in a very short period of time.
However, there are many challenges. Soldiers are poorly paid and ill-equipped. Some have reportedly sold their uniforms and weapons to buy food for their families. The army also lacks sophisticated command structures. Many fear Somalia could slide back into chaos if some of these challenges are not resolved.
The 57th anniversary of Somalia's armed forces took place peacefully. There is an enemy who wants to destroy Somalia, but we will overcome. Somalis will overcome their enemy.
President Farmajo has announced several measures to fight Al-Shabaab, from offering amnesty to declaring war on the militants. However, some young people are losing patience.
When the president declared war on militants, suicide bombs increased the day after. What he's saying will only increase the attacks and many people will die.
Somali military forces don't get proper support and they do not get a fixed salary. I don't think Al-Shabaab will be overcome within 2 years or even 20 years.
Last week, President Farmajo replaced the country's military and intelligence chiefs. He also instructed the army to prepare for a new offensive against Al-Shabaab. Susan Mogeli, CGTN.
Dr. Ziad Akul, though, we've had the interventions in West Africa with Boko Haram and East Africa with Al-Shabaab. So in the North African region, though, what kind of global and regional reactions and interventions are we seeing to these terrorism efforts?
Well, I think we're about to witness some new alliances when it comes to countering terrorism in Africa. I believe that it is about time for the African Union to start an initiative gathering the different regional actors concerned about terrorism, and at the same time, you have an influential actor within the continent like Egypt is trying basically to become a proxy for the international community to counter terrorism in Africa. So basically what we're about to witness is a combination of a regional alliance of states that have a terrorism problem, and at the same time an international alliance with those regional actors from U.S. and the EU in specific. So Africa is about to witness some new transformation when it comes to measures of countering terrorism, specifically in 2017, and that has a lot to do with the direction of the Trump administration in the U.S. Towards Africa.
Adeyemi, though, we did see West African countries forming a regional force to combat Boko Haram. Just how much success did that yield?
Yes, I could see West African countries coming together to fight the Boko Haram. And even if AU countries too can join them, I mean, the security agencies in all the countries, if they can share intelligence within themselves, we can we can really counter the terrorism action by this. But the problem is we are not, if we are able to get together, I mean the African countries, the security agencies in all these AU countries, we share intelligence, because most of all these things are transborder crime. Movement of people, movement of firearms, movement of drugs. If the security agencies can put their resources together and combat this thing, I mean, the thing will go down. Like now that the Boko Haram is going to become a thing of the past in Nigeria and Cameroon, it's because of the effort of Nigeria, Cameroon, Mali, and other countries coming together to fight this common menace, common enemy of us. So if all African countries can come together,
right,
share their resources, share intelligence among themselves, I'm sure we will be able to combat the terrorism.
Well, in Somalia, though, Mohamed Dire, in Somalia, we had President Farmajo saying that he was willing to negotiate with Al-Shabaab. Your view on that, do you agree with that as a negotiation tactic?
President Farmajo has announced that he will negotiate with the terror groups, Al-Shabaab, in one way or another. That one has been welcomed by many people, since most of the people believe that these efforts or the terror groups' activities cannot be solved only militarily. But many analysts believe that, or many people on the ground believe that terror groups, most of the time, since they carry out bloody attacks in the presence of many AMISOM forces and SNA. Also, some other issues, some other approaches has to be tested, whether it might be bear fruits or not. But the president has announced it is true. On the other hand, the president has said the terror groups or the brainwashed youth in the group have to surrender to the government. They will be trained, they will be given education, they will be given all the other sorts in their life in the name if they might be surrendered to the government and take part in the rebuilding of the country that is going on right away.
Right.
He has given 60 days. He has given 60 days for the brainwashed youth under the terror groups to surrender to the government.
All right. We will be looking at those approaches that Africa has been using to deal with terrorism on the continent. But for now, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll have more insight into Africa's anti-terrorism efforts. To stay with us.
Africa is not one story.
We look forward to the Security Council to continue to maintain the constructiveness with which it has so far approached the situation since the beginning of Boko Haram-induced crisis in the region. Despite the enormous challenges occasioned by the terrorist activities of Boko Haram, the government of Nigeria remains resolute to defeating terrorism in all its ramifications.
Well, that was the Nigerian representative to the United Nations, Anthony Bosa, speaking after the Security Council adopted its first resolution addressing Boko Haram's presence in West Africa. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, the insurgency in Nigeria has severely affected the Lake Chad basin, where thousands live in camps for the displaced and are running out of critical aid. But for these Nigerian refugees, returning home is not an option. CGTN's Penina Karibe recently met with a survivor of the 2015 massacre in the Nigerian town of Baga to get a personal account of how the insurgency is severely affecting the lives of countless in the region.
My name is Nasiru Saidu. I am from Doron Baga in Kuka local government of Borno State. I left there on 3rd of January 2015 because of an attack by Boko Haram. I was there. When I was there, I was a farmer. I am with all my family, with the wife and 7 children. I am there with my independence. I'm doing the whole things myself. I'm a farmer, fisherman, and a businessman at the same time. We received a bad day of 3rd of that January that we have been attacked, 2015. We have been attacked by Boko Haram at 5 o'clock in the morning. When we heard that gunshot, we think that it is a normally gunshot that we used to hear from one Nigerian army garrison that is just 6 kilometers from our village. We stayed there without any response. At last, about 6 o'clock, 7:30, we just saw some people that has been wounded by that insurgencies.
How was Baga before it was attacked by the Boko Haram?
Before attack by the Boko Haram, Baga is a good place because there is a lot of people. There is even, I will say, people from Ghana, from Mali, from Niger and other countries that are going there for their marketing process, because we have fish. In Dorombaga we have an international fish market, and there is beans, there is maize and other farm products there at Baga.
Describe to us Baga after the Boko Haram attacks.
All the places has burnt. There is Nigerian army, but they are not doing well at all. They are not doing well.
Why do you say that?
Because up to now, you should not have any vehicle to use. There is no foil. You are a fisherman. If you catch fish, you have no market to take that fish to. If you are, you have an animals. If you want to sell that animals for your, I will say, problem, to solve your problem, there is no market. They said that it has been prohibited to anybody to sell either animal or fish. No market of that things, unless if you are going to eat that things at your home. Yes, I heard that there is multinational force, but I saw them at Niger. I saw Chadian and Nigerian army there, but I didn't see any Nigerian army. When I go to Baga, it is only Nigerian army there. I didn't see any Chadian or Nigerian army there. It is only Nigerian army. So on my own, I will not say that there is multinational, because multinational means to mix from to say that there is Nigeria, Niger, or even a Cameroon army there. There is no. It is only Nigerian armies there. So there is nothing like multinational at Bagana.
The government says it is winning the war against Boko Haram. Is that what you saw when you went there?
They were fighting Boko Haram. They were doing their best, but anybody that is in Abuja cannot fight Boko Haram in Lakchan. If they say something, those that were there will start doing it for some months. But they need monitors. That is what I'm saying. They need monitors to go and see what is going on, especially at Baga, because Baga is a good and huge place. Millions of people are benefiting from there, but now there is nothing to do. That is why, on my own, we are now suffering from two hands. We are in the middle. One hand military, one hand Boko Haram. So we are in the middle.
And we continue our discussion now, and I still have my guest standing by in Cairo, Dr. Ziad Akul, Senior Researcher at the Al-Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies. In Lagos, Adeyemi Sonaike, the former Assistant Director of Nigeria Secret Police. In Mogadishu, resident and youth activist Mohammed Edire Ibrahim. Dr. Ziad Akul, we have looked at the various approaches the Somali government is looking at trying to rout out the Al-Shabaab. The military option that some governments have taken, is that the only viable option at this point?
Well, you see, the problem is that terrorism in Africa right now is not a conventional terrorism that could be simply dealt with through only hardcore security or military measures. If the options of negotiations exist, if the options of sponsoring some kind of an ideological revision exists, then they should be taken. And I think that in Egypt, for example, this has been done during the 90s, and it has actually worked for some 10 or 15 years. So it is not necessarily a military solution that will work. It is actually a combination of different aspects and different dimensions that must be coordinated together through the states that are facing terrorism phenomena in Africa.
Adeyemi Sonaike, what options exist for Africa?
I think the option that exists for Africa is, first and foremost, let us look at the causes of all this violence. What's responsible for the forming of Boko Haram in Nigeria and other areas where we have militants? Most of it as a result of corruption in those countries, as a result of unemployment, as a result of lack of good education, as a result of so many things. If the government can see to find solution to all these problems, provide education, qualitative education to every citizen, so that those people they are brainwashing, if they have work, what to do. If those who are rich in Africa can industrialize the African continent, like what Dangote is doing in Nigeria and other countries, if other African men who are buoyant enough can do this, let them bring down an industry. One there's industry, there's room for employment by youths, because when the youths are not having anything to do, they will take to crime, no how. So if I don't believe in saying only military effort cannot solve the problem. Let the government look to the social problem that we are having in all this continent. In Africa, let the government make a solution. At least they can invite the public, involve in public-private policy to bring in education, to bring in good health, to bring in infrastructure, to bring in employment. I think by doing that, we can successfully fight this terrorism with an ease.
Mohammed Edire, though, you have mentioned what President Farmajo is trying to do to eradicate terrorism. Now, what are we likely to see coming out of Al-Shabaab during the rest of the year?
Al-Shabaab, as we have said before, they have been carrying out bloody attacks in government-controlled areas, in the markets, in the city. So in that case, we can see terrorism is a phenomenon that has no ties with geographical background. So now in that case, with the help of strong AMISOM forces and SNA and US forces, the strength and capabilities of Al-Shabaab has been reduced in many areas, whereby the leaders have been targeted and killed, like Ahmed Godane, as I've said. They have been pushed out of the major cities, but still they keep on carrying bloody attacks. So now, in my hope, terrorism can be reduced to some extent in 2017 with the help of these forces and the trained government forces on the ground. Similarly, Al-Shabaab, just like the other terror groups, they use ideologies to brainwash the youth, to carry out their intentions. So now it is upon the government and the other concerned parties to come up with ideologies that can defeat and bring to end of these terror groups.
Well, Dr. Ankelo, I do want to come back to my earlier point, looking at these statistics of terrorism on the continent for the last 10 years, and it has been pretty high there. So if you look at 2017, though, and what we are seeing with ISIS in North Africa and in Libya, and also what we are seeing with the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, what is going to happen in 2017? Are we going to see less terrorism, more terrorism? What are we likely to see?
Well, what we're likely, it's very difficult, of course, to sort of expect if we're going to see less terrorism or more terrorism, but what's sure is that we're going to see more international cooperation towards what's going on in Africa from terrorism, specifically in North Africa. I think that the international community and the main actors in the North African continent, mainly Egypt, Algeria, and Tunisia, have realized that Libya is becoming a grave threat for their interests and for the security of the region as a whole. And this is why we're about to witness some sort of a transformation when it comes to the political procedure in Libya. There might not be fewer terrorist attacks, but there will definitely be some measures taken to actually try and put a framework that is capable of reducing the terrorist attacks. So even if we don't witness the results of that framework in 2017, then we're definitely about to see them in later years, maybe 2018 or something. So the point is that Africa has become a priority on the agenda of a lot of regional and international actors, and I believe this will definitely witness the frequency of terrorist attacks. I believe this will definitely reflect on the frequency of terrorist attacks in the region.
All right, and that's all we have time for this week. We'll leave it there for the moment, but thank you to my guests for their insights in Cairo. Dr. Ziad Akol, Senior Researcher at the Al-Akram Center for Political and Strategic Studies in Lagos, Adeyemi Sonaike, former Assistant Director of Nigeria's Secret Police, and in Mogadishu, youth activist Mohammed Dirie Ibrahim. Remember, you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall. Goodbye.